Albemarle County. Oh. Okay, well, then I shall call this meeting to order. The Historic Preservation Committee of Albemarle County for June 27th, 2022. It's currently 4:30 p.m. and we do officially have a quorum now. We've established a quorum, and I hope everybody has an opportunity to review the minutes from last meeting. And if anybody has any changes or remarks regarding those meetings, please do so. Otherwise, if not, someone is welcome to motion to approve these meetings. Anyone have any comments or corrections or changing to the minutes?
I don't. I move to approve the minutes from the appropriate meeting.
Motion is to approve and is seconded.
Excuse me, who's seconding that?
Me.
Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. So the minutes are hereby approved.
We need a.
You have to wait to vote. You have to call the vote, Ross.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We need to call a vote. For what?
We have to vote on the minutes. We only had a second and a motion and a second.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Liz. So all in favor to approve the minutes, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to the minutes, please raise your hand or say nay. Okay, minutes are approved.
Ross, I'm sorry. I think we need to take a step back. The COVID statement,
oh yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's been one of those days.
Take a record of who's attending.
Yes, I'm sorry. So this meeting is being held pursuant to and in compliance to ordinance number 20-A16, an ordinance to ensure the continuity of government during the COVID-19 disaster. Opportunities for public access to this meeting are posted on the county's website at the county's calendar. The public has real-time audio-visual access to this meeting over Zoom and real-time audio access over the telephone, both as provided in lawfully posted meeting notice. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the county's website. This online meeting is a public record and subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act.
Thanks, Ross. The next thing would either everybody needs to just state their names for the record, or Ross or Chris, do you want to just list who's in attendance today?
Sure. We have Betsy Baden, Carter Montague, Liz Russell, Daniel Giddick, and Felissa Mitchell.
Okay, we're back on track.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Okay, so all of that is taken care of. So what's straight to our updates for demolition and documentation?
Yes.
The demolition, that's one thing I did not have pulled up, was the demolition report. Margaret, what was on the demolition report?
Chris, what was on the demolition report?
Just Schuyler Road?
Schuyler Road was only one documented. There's a few other ones. The hotel and the office building on Seminole Trail that's related to, I believe it was a resource that wanted to be documented. I can't remember the name of the actual hotel to actually refer to it, so everybody knows which buildings I'm talking about. Maybe Margaret can give a better reference.
Was it the motel? Was it motel, not hotel?
Motel, yeah.
At the, was it the RS2 residences?
Yes, yeah. I was going to refer to the project, but I'm not sure if anybody would get that particular reference.
Yeah. And the name of the motel escapes me. It's I think maybe you'll find it on the map.
Did we determine that that did not need to be documented?
No, I think when it was last brought up, I think we were waiting just for the opportunity to document it.
Oh, okay.
And ultimately the demo permits come in for those two resources. And I just wanted to confirm with you all that that was still the intention that be documented. Let me find it on the map real quick.
Chris, do you have the parcel number?
No, I don't have GIS open.
Okay, I'll open it. If you want to go on, if you want to, I'll look for it while you want to continue on.
So we have the Schuyler Road. Were you in so 8963 Schuyler Road has not been documented yet?
I did it.
Carter actually saying.
Oh, great.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get inside. I think the owner told Chris it was unlocked, but when I went down there, it wasn't. So I just documented the outside. You know, it looks like it's not in very good shape. It looks like it's being torn down and they're going to put like a mobile home on the site. There's an Oakwood or Clayton Homes sign out on the street. It's just one of those typical soapstone company houses that, you know, that you see driving down through Schuyler and Alberine, that, you know, you see a row of 6 or 8 of them that are all the same. It's one of those. They all have soapstone foundations, which is pretty cool. Other than that, they're fairly nondescript.
It was a foundation's piers, or was it a solid
piers that, yeah, it was originally piers, and then somebody come back in and filled it in with more soapstone and just sort of random fieldstone, but non-structural, you know, but yes, piers in the corners. Had a vinyl siding on it that was over like the old asphalt siding, and I'm not sure if there was anything under that, maybe originally wood, I couldn't tell. You know, at this point that's about as affordable as housing gets in Albemarle County. I think one down the road sold a couple months ago for under $100,000. So there's a lot of them down there. Most of them are not in very good shape. Some of them have already been torn down. You know, they're definitely important as sort of a reminder of the mining nature of that area, and you know, they're unique in Central Virginia, and the way that you know, you just see these, I guess it was early tract housing where they just, you know, they come in and they build the same plan on 15 lots all down the road, and that was that. So you know, sorry to see it be torn down, but it'd be a big job to save it at this point, given the condition it was in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, those are obviously a big part of Albemarle County history, that soapstone industry, with the rail system they had down there and everything. So thank you, Carter, for getting down there to get that, because those to me are important, not just because of the structure, but because of what industry they supported, and what a big industry and important industry that was.
And some of it's interesting too. Some of them have, you know, because the soapstone, they worked at the quarry and they had access to the leftovers. And so sometimes you go in one of those and they'll have these incredible, you know, soapstone tile showers that, you know, somebody would pay an arm and a leg for somebody to build today. And I think they just sort of took the leftovers from the job and went home on the weekends and put stone in their houses. So it's kind of fun to go in them sometimes.
I always love running into the soapstone sinks. You know, we run into those really deep double well soapstone sinks that are remarkable and
Yep.
heavy as can be. But I've seen numerous of those around before.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for getting that done.
Sure.
Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, that's on 29 North.
Ridgewood Motel?
Yeah.
That's the property.
Yeah.
So is that 29 North?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
There was some mention of one in the document. Check the minutes. It was the project was brought up in 2020, and I just wanted to reconfirm.
I think that's again important because of that era of the Motor Lodge, which is no longer really in existence.
Yeah.
We documented the Greenwood Motor Lodge, which as a boy, I always got a kick out of it because it used to have a little sign of a kitten with a blanket over its neck, and it said, "Sleep like a kitten." But that was the Greenwood Motel that was just kind of east of Crozet that we documented last. In their application, Chris, do they have much detail on that structure?
I hadn't gotten a chance to review it yet to see, but I don't recall if they've taken any photos or anything.
I was just curious how many units there were and when the last time it was used. So shall we schedule, is it ready to be scheduled?
Yeah, I'll reach out to the applicant to schedule something.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, should we have a discussion at any, I mean, do y'all think it should be documented?
I agree, Ross,
Yeah.
what you said.
I mean, it's an era that's no longer, and they'll never build those again. So yeah, I mean, that's
And
why
so much of that 29 corridor, you know, that era, that development has already been lost.
Yeah, no, I
with
agree.
Expansion, with widening projects.
Yeah, there's still a neat one that is in Ivy. If you're at the Tillman Road intersection, just west of it on the left-hand side.
Right behind Hardendale, right? Between
Yeah,
Hardendale
right
and-
behind Hardendale. Blair
cool.
Turner owns it, and he's done some neat things with it. I would think somebody would Airbnb it. But
Yeah, I was going to say short stay would be perfect.
Yeah, he has annual tenants in there that have been there with him quite a while. But that's another good example of the Motor Lodge. You know, that's when people traveled and they had the waysides everywhere, and the families would have their basket of chicken or whatever and always eat on the side of the road. When America, they were traveling. Okay, well, Chris, if you will, you know, let us know when that's available. I definitely think we should put that together. I'll look on the GIS to see what kind of diagram they have of what's there, and we'll work from that.
Okay, will do.
Okay, but those were the only two on the demo list.
Yeah, I'm looking in the in what they've submitted, and so far I don't really see much of anything. I don't think they submitted much detail.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll document it. Anybody else have any other comments?
Hi, yeah, this is Felissa. What's the deal with Sismont Manor? I only ask because I'm not sure from that.
I was going to bring that one up. There's one more at Sismont. I'm not sure if it's related. I tried to look in the Department of Historical Resources information, and I'm not sure if it's related to the historic manor on the property, one of the outbuildings. I mean,
yeah, is it the main house or the outbuilding? I can't.
Are you all viewing this, the aerial?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, the pins where the house or the outbuilding, the house is kind of here. So maybe, I think I'm leaning towards that probably needs to be documented, or at least taken a look at. I looked at the information they provided. It didn't give enough information, like a photo or anything, to confirm if it was one of the historic outbuildings. But just its proximity to the historic manor, we probably seemed like we probably should go out there and at least take a look at it.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I'm sure it's not it's probably a contributing structure in the Southwest Mountain Historic District, isn't it? Probably.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would love it if we were to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay, I'll reach out to that owner or the applicant for that demo permit as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Shall we move to the discussion of the comprehensive plan and historic preservation plan updates?
Sure. This time we've really just reserved for members to either ask questions or share information that they've found in their work so far. Not sure how many people have been able to begin their research. I did get some information from Betsy and from Ed and from Diane and from Liz as well. So I think what we talked about before was when individual members were done with their research, maybe they would present it to the group and indicate what they found. Maybe that can generate some discussion, or we can change it up to whatever the group feels would be most beneficial. Anybody want to start?
I have Fairfax and Loudoun, and what was interesting with them, and I'm still got most of it together, but haven't finished it. They have several historic districts within their county. So I was trying to figure out who I could reach out and find the history of when these areas were designated as districts, and scratching my head how a little district, like if Scottsville wanted a district. I mean, they're different districts than our historic districts, like the Greenwood Afton. I mean, they're regulated districts.
They're local districts.
Local historic districts. So it'd be kind of interesting. It would be kind of a way for us to start with a real small one somewhere in a little hamlet, and then work our, as a test and see. But, I have no idea how these districts begin, or what the history of how they were turned into little historic districts, and they're regulated separately. So I'm trying to dig into a little bit more than what they have, but how they got there.
Right. Have you looked on their county code website?
I have not. Is that okay?
So you can mine a lot of information, probably not the history, but you're talking about maybe if there's different design guidelines or different processes for the different, I'm assuming they're like a historic overlay. That's all going to be within like Municicode or whatever. And if you go onto the Fairfax County website, you can find, where their whole county code is, and then anything related to historic districts would be a section.
Right. No, I found the sections. I just didn't know how they were established.
Yeah, I found and I'm not done mine either, but I found that if you go to the comp plan or the historic preservation plan, you can find the history there.
Okay.
And maybe we should back up, Karen. What the group is doing is we're sort of doing some background research to prepare for the historic resources section of the comp plan update. And rather than reinvent the wheel, we've sort of distributed some of the other Virginia counties to individuals to do research and see what other counties are doing. And what they've had success with in their historic preservation programs and to see what might be useful for us, for Albemarle County. Several years ago, the committee had also done some research into counties that had local historic preservation ordinances. Some members have been have continued to be interested in pursuing that. And while we were doing the comp plan research, it seemed reasonable to go ahead and update that table that had that historic preservation ordinance information as well. So
okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And certainly, I mean, I still, last time I was on this group, I still would really like Albemarle to move forward with having an ordinance. So yeah, that's where I sit on that. I just sent the group a little link. It had a little bit of the history of how Fairfax County, it said they established those districts in 1969 or something like that. It was a long time ago. Anyway, right. I look forward to seeing what you all find out. And if you need to give me any homework, feel free.
Awesome. I'm going to take you up on that.
I love researching.
Well, that's what I'm not good at, but I'm trying to peel back the layers and get into it. Let's see.
I'd be happy to give a little update on Hanover County. And, you know, maybe not bore you with some of the form stuff, but they do have an ordinance adopted in 1992. It seems like it applies to at least 3 villages and 17 districts. Right now it applies to, like I said, districts and in that architecture and buildings, but it does mention that could be expanded to cultural landscapes and archaeology sites, but none are currently designated as such. It's interesting. I find some disjointedness between what the comp plan says, what the code says, and then what the 2 commissions that kind of carry out oversight of the ordinance do. So there's the Historical Commission, and then there's the ARB, and the ARB reviews, reviews applications for certificates of appropriateness within these historic district overlays. I did find something interesting. I do think it's interesting that the Historical Commission, the makeup of it is really intentional. 1 member of the Board of Supervisors, 1 member representing each magisterial district, and then representatives from selected historical organizations in the county. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That really brings a different dynamic. For example, a representative from the Black Heritage Society, a representative from Hanover Civic League, National Park Service, Historic Society, Center for Arts and Education. So I just found that to be an interesting way of like getting momentum, perhaps that's a way of getting momentum into the work that the Historical Commission does. In their comp plan, one interesting thing is stated a tiered approach to how they sort of like one of their overarching goals, or I suppose objectives, is to, as a program, is to like categorize historic sites into 3 tiers. Category 1 being the highest tier. These are National Historic Landmarks or sites. And it seems like that's a way that they're prioritizing, but it doesn't relate to what the ordinance is doing. So again, kind of like a little bit of disjointedness. Another interesting thing in the comp plan was that they title the section on historic preservation and heritage tourism. So they're clearly like making that link to tourism, i.e. economic development, but they don't actually articulate that. And the economic development section doesn't reference historic preservation, it does reference tourism. So, that's just, I think what that takeaway from me is like, we need to clearly define those links and not let them become lost. Just looking at any other. I'd like to dig in a little more to and reach out to someone in the planning commission and in the planning department at Hanover to kind of understand. I think the real, one thing we're really trying to get at is how does this work in practice, right? Like what sort of staff time is involved? It talks about staff review of certificates of appropriateness before they go before the ARB. What does that look like? How does that break down funding wise? That sort of stuff is not available on the website. But that's my next step.
Liz, in that document that you sent, that was just the ordinance.
Yes, I have another page. I've done the comp plan research form as well. I just haven't shared that with you yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I have those two things are what we're working on, right? The ordinance form and then the comp plan research form.
Exactly. Yep. Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll put, when I put it all together, they had a lot of incentives in Loudoun for restoration projects that were tied into to tax tax credits or tax relief, which I'll get into more when I put it all together. But there were definitely, the county was involved with incentives, which I thought was interesting. Just again, kind of correlating back to the land use, that's an incentive. So anyway, anybody else have any comments?
Would it be an appropriate opportunity to just maybe mention the letter we received from Preservation Piedmont?
Absolutely.
And I hope that Karen, yeah, you received that as well. So we got a letter from Preservation Piedmont, basically sort of bemoaning or voicing disappointment with the imminent loss of the plans to demolish Dunlora Farm. Preservation Piedmont notes that if the county had a historic preservation ordinance in place, these homes could be preserved, rehabilitated, tax credits, repurposed, right? I don't need to tell you all this. But I did appreciate later in the letter that they offer that even before adopting historic preservation ordinance, smaller steps could take a great difference in protecting the history that makes Albemarle County such a desirable place to live, establishing incentives to avoid or delay demolitions. In this case, they're saying of individually listed properties. And secondly, establishing a local historic marker program, which could involve prioritization with community input. So nice to have support from our area preservation advocacy group.
Just a quick question or a comment on the historic marker part. Now you can petition to get a marker, but you have to pay for it yourself. It's several $1,000s. Because we've been thinking about getting some funds raised in Southern Albemarle because we don't have that many, and there's a lot that has happened there. I'm just curious, were you referring to a program where there would be more financial support then? Like there would be a fund, Karen, and maybe people would apply?
You may know that the Historic Preservation Committee has worked on sort of, I guess, a pilot of a local marker program. It was approved through the Community Remembrance Project, sort of allocated by the Board of Supervisors a certain amount of money to move ahead and recommend and install 5 local historic markers, different from state DHR. Right. And I think a lot of good work has gone into researching what a local marker program would look like, its potential, some options of ways we would partner with area, historical commission, et cetera. Just kind of pressed pause on that as we are turning attention to the comp plan work. I'm gonna die right now. Can you hear me still?
Yes.
Okay. And so I guess, that the potential is still there. And I think people on this committee very much want to see that happen. The intent was always to have it be a community-led process.
Mhm.
And lacking the ability to do that in the Historic Preservation Committee, you know, just our structure and our ability to kind of meet and organize, we thought we might try to couple the community input around the local market program with future community input around the comp plan as a whole.
Okay.
You know, as maybe it's a part within the comp plan, right? And we say this is what this could look like. All
right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's good to know because obviously the planning commission is to help make the comp plan. So it's good. I want to be up on what you all want to make sure it gets in there. And I do think that the more we can get some specifics in there, the better.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I guess I should also add, Karen, that the plans are, you know, we do the comp plan update and do the broad sort of a coordination of all the goals and objectives, to try to get a grasp on the goals that are in like areas that have overlapping goals. You know, we've got historic preservation, we have entrance corridors, we have land conservation, we have, you know, natural heritage. So it seems like there's a lot of overlap that maybe we should be focusing on more. So we're hoping to deal with that, address that in the comp plan update. And then once we get all those updated goals and objectives set, the historic preservation plan needs to be updated because it has not been updated since it was originally adopted back in 2000. So, and then we would have even more opportunity to get more specific about those specific historic preservation programs.
Gotcha. I mean, I'll just say one overarching comment about the comp plan and then I'll stop talking about it. You know, one of the challenges with our comp plan is it promises a lot of things to a lot of people. And as a result, there's a lot of disappointed people out there. And so, you know, my hope is that the new comp plan will actually be a more actionable plan that isn't just sort of the kitchen sink and bucket for dumping everything in, but something more strategic. So that's kind of where I'm headed philosophically with it. And I'll leave it at that for now.
And I think that all sounds great. And I just think, you know, we have all these programs, but I think a lot of them do have some overlapping goals. And if we can do better, if we can identify those better and prioritize better, then we'll be more efficient and more productive. That's my hope.
Sure. I mean, yeah, historic preservation is not something that's like a little boutique item off in the corner. It's like the, you know, the underpinning of our whole society. And it's so important to not think of it as just something extra we do in good budget years, but it really needs a lot more support. And there's so much support in this county for it that, you know, I'm hoping we can do a lot more with more resources, but I'm not running for the Board of Supervisors at present, so I'll just stop.
But Liz, I think what you said in your example that you found, you know, those chapters weren't even making all the connections that needed to be made. And I think that's one of the things that we need to focus on.
Yeah, I think their comp plan was good in some ways, and then just kind of lacking some specificity in other ways. That it would probably be, you know, maybe this is a conversation I could have with planning staff, like what would actually be more helpful to have in the comp plan.
Yeah.
Would you like me to say a few words about Arlington County? Because they have a pretty extensive program. They have a historic preservation overlay district. And it sounded in reading through the 5 pages of information that they sent me that they also have a design review board, which means that they try to hold the historic districts to be, you know, fairly, or at least fairly restricted in what you can build in there that would be out of character with a historic district. They have a historic affairs and landmark review board, which can consist of up to 15 members that reviews things like Well, basically the purpose is of their overlay district is to promote health, safety, and general welfare through identification, preservation, and enhancement of buildings, structures, landscapes, etc., with special historic, cultural, architectural, and archaeological significance. So they want to identify and protect historic resources throughout the county and ensure that Arlington County's historic districts, new structures, buildings, additions, landscaping, and related elements will be in harmony with their setting and environment. So this is the design portion of it. And they want to maintain and improve property values by providing incentives for the upkeep, rehabilitation, and restoration of older structures, encourage nominations of historic properties to the National Register, and to promote tourism and enhance building and industry through the protection of and education about historic, cultural, and archaeological resources. And then I have 5 pages of specifics. So they have really taken it to the end. And I suggested that we might want to follow their example at some point in time, even if we have to move into it gradually.
You mentioned incentives. Were you able to find what incentives they offer?
I'll look through the 5 pages. I'm sure they describe them. They describe, you know, what you need to be in order to serve on the board. And I think you need to be, you know, a professional of some sort or fairly knowledgeable.
I think incentives is the key word, and yeah.
I'm looking for the incentives portion here.
Seems like most of the incentives are usually tax related that I've come across.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know if this is part of this, but I don't know why we aren't more involved with, like, for instance, let's use Dunlora as an example. Why the Board of Supervisors, or we're not involved in some part of that process with such a, you know, a historic property, that part of the process wouldn't be called upon us to, you know, identify the property and you know, the historic significance of the house and the structures and you know, all aspects of the property as far as architects and so forth.
I think the difficulty is how to codify that into the code, right?
Right.
What mechanism would, if it was Planning Commission, be, right? How would they say, like, applicant, you didn't, Historic Preservation Commission doesn't like what you're doing. You know, it has to have some teeth in the code, which is what the overlay allows. Or maybe if an overlay, like what Preservation Piedmont says, applies only to individually listed, which I frankly would not be a little bit limiting, because we have so much more that's significant in the county other than individually listed properties.
Yeah, I just wonder, without an overlay, what kind of trigger can we get introduced to the process? I speak to some of the Planning Commission members, and it seems like they're district by district sometimes, and they don't always know what the other district's doing at times. So I don't know. That's something we can figure out how to get in the mix.
Well, we certainly read all of the applications for everyone's district, and you know, but the thing is that usually what happens is we get an application packet on a Wednesday and the vote is on a Tuesday, and it'll say there's a structure on here. It'll tell us whether or not, you know, it has been looked at by this committee, you know, yes or no. But there's very little at that point that we can't make them save it. We can't, you know, we can encourage, we can cajole, but you know, realize at that stage, a lot of times they've already spent quite a lot of money on their layout. And, you know, I will say that a lot of times I'm told, like, there's absolutely no way we can change the layout to save the structure. And really there is. but we have no mechanism for making them do that.
Right.
You know, we're really just concerned, we're only having statutory authority over the use.
Can it not be,
you know,
can it not be some sort of negotiating bargaining chip though, as part of, I mean, all these projects are applying for variances of some sort.
we're not allowed to negotiate a proffer.
You can't bring a proffer to the table.
Now, what the county can't, what all localities can do is say, these are the things we wish for. And, you know, it's just like what we do with affordable housing. You know, we sometimes get more than the minimum by saying, wow, we really, really like projects that have affordable housing.
I didn't realize that.
Boy, we really love adaptive reuse, or we really love, you know, and you know, like, we will be more amenable to approving your project if you meet these core values, but we can't.
But you
really
can't
get,
say, for example, we'll approve X density if you save this historic structure.
No.
Okay.
No, but that's why I want an ordinance.
Okay.
An ordinance could do something like that, right?
Okay.
It can have
Yep.
an incentive, and then you know, like I've always heard, developers really want to be told what they can do. They just want to be able to navigate the process.
Right.
Clearer it is, the happier they are to check the boxes.
But it is important to understand that some of these buildings are being lost just through like
Private.
division process. You know, that doesn't have, it's not something that would go to the planning commission. You know, if someone wants to.
But my point exactly, these ones that are going to the planning commission, historic preservation should be in there somehow with some type of input at some point, I would hope. You know, maybe it would be the planning commission would, you know, suggest that the historic preservation committee have a look at it. You know, I'm not sure of the whole process, but how we could get introduced from the planning commission to be, you know, assigned something, you know, to do for the planning commission.
Right. Our role is
For
to be
the
advisory.
board of supervisors.
Yeah, we don't really have the opportunity to be advisory because there's no mechanism to trigger that.
Exactly. And it seems like we're out of the loop, you know, we're on the sidelines and we're not gonna be able to get involved in any of that aspect, which that's kind of why we're there.
So it sounds like maybe what you're saying is to sort of amplify what's already being done with staff. When we have an SP or rezoning under review, staff will typically identify whether there's a historic resource there and provide some basic information. But as Karen said, there's, you know, there's only so much we can do. But if it sounds like what you're saying is what you'd rather see is for there to be a more formal process where the Historic Preservation Committee is making that recommendation, and maybe that brings more attention to the issue.
Yeah, so it starts with the staff and then I guess goes to the planning commission. The staff or the planning commission could say, well, we suggest this be looked at by the Historic Preservation Committee, as a recommendation.
In Hanover, that's done by the ARB.
Right.
So it's interesting to think about how that relationship would work. Would it, how many cooks are in the kitchen? If it were,
I think if we had one thing you could do is say, come up with some kind of standard that it's like, if these conditions are present, the Historic Preservation Committee will provide an informal review.
Yeah.
Because you guys don't need to weigh in on every structure that's over 50, some 1970 whatever garage, that isn't historic.
Yeah. Well, the individually listed, or, if you even wanted to expand that out. Although I just don't think you're going to get a lot of rezonings and SUPs in the rural district. So it's, you're missing a huge swath of, maybe like.
Well, we are. A lot of the redevelopment areas are rural zoning. Yeah. And they are just in the growth area. And
so I don't know, maybe it'd be interesting to see like what looking backward, what of the past years, 5 years 1 year's worth of SUPs and ZMAs had, were in a historic district or had an individually listed resource. And then that would give kind of a way to understand, okay, what would this scope be looking like?
I think it would be a handful, at least for the ones that we look. We only look, the Planning Commission's only looking at, now keep in mind, the Planning Commission's only looking at stuff that's not by right.
Right.
You know, somebody just wants to put a subdivision on something that's already zoned for something, it could have a structure on it, and that's just going through administrative review. So you'd kind of need two processes, one for things that get flagged for Planning Commission review, and one that is in the by right process. But I think if you, it would be like, it's not a new regulation. It would just be, in these cases, extra diligence is required, and the county will also consult with its historic preservation committee. Like, so if we have something that's really, you know, we know is an important property and they want to do something really serious, like the Clifton Inn, then Margaret sits on the dais at that, you know, she's there, and she's there for us to ask her lots of questions because we know that's a very sensitive one. But there have certainly been ones where it's like, okay, this is an old farmhouse on this property and it was built, and I'm just making something up, 1880, although I do have a property in mind. You know, is it really significant? Was it so altered as to be only a ghost of its former self at this point anyway? You know, et cetera. I just think that if you had some more specifics, because I wouldn't want to put a burden on all of you all or the county staff to say like, hey, every time there's a structure over 50 years old, the Historic Preservation Committee wants to look at it, because I know you don't, and you don't need to. But maybe there could be some language we could come up with that would have staff, because staff doesn't give the Planning Commission a lot of time, or the board, but they're, you know, usually that application is rattling around for several months before it goes to the Planning Commission. So there would be some time in there, I think, for you guys.
In Arlington County, they have a list of 5 pages of what qualifies to come before the review board or for being designated as a historic property. And it might be worth distributing it for what it's worth to let everybody on the committee look it over. I think they've, you know, crossed their T's and dotted their I's. I don't find any incentives spelled out in the documentation they sent me, but it would be interesting to inquire further to see what they've done. And I suspect Chris is probably right that it's tax incentives of some sort. But they're a more urban county than we are, for sure. So,
well, I would certainly like to see that. And in terms of incentives, you know, I mean, there's also incentives like not just tax credits, but whether or not we could legally do something like, in exchange for preserving this historic structure on site, you can have some extra density over in this other corner.
Well,
you know,
that's
so
what
that
Carter
you
was
get,
talking about.
you know, yeah, same. You don't lose any money by doing it. And, you know, you all know cases where when it was really made a public priority that was heavily pushed, people have volunteered to conserve places that they wouldn't otherwise do because they're going to have a lot of negative publicity that, you know, it's sort of not worth it to them. So.
Margaret, would it be possible to set up a, you know, a Dropbox or some sort of, we can, I don't know if you're restricted from whether there's any FOIA restrictions, but some sort of like place where we can put these documents as we're sharing them as relates to his comp plan and ordinance research all in one place?
We can look into it. I'm not sure what the answer is.
Okay. It'd just be nice to share notes.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes things get lost in emails.
Right. We'll look into it.
Well, it's really interesting, Karen, having your perspective. You know, we've been thinking, so I think rural area, you know, how do you stop Joe homeowner from demolishing a really great historic structure that's just, you know, in a historic district, and your perspective in more like growth area is an interesting thing to think about. And maybe it's a baby step in working with developers.
Yeah, there's all different ways to get things done. I mean, we've been able to get more affordable housing and more environmental conservation.
Mm-hmm.
So why not use those same approaches for historic? You know, and I was also very much on the leaning in the more liberal side, if you will, not as in terms of homestays. I know a number of people who, you know, because they were able to rent out the house for homestays, that afforded them the money to do the restoration. And so a number of people have done that. And so I was trying to tell the county that we should be more, there's people who also have inherited homes. They're not ready to move to Albemarle County to live in great grandpa's house, but they need some way to pay to fix it up, you know?
Sure.
And keep that structure from dilapidating to the point that it becomes a tear down. And homestays are a way to do that. So I'm always trying to think outside the box of how can we make it easier for people to do what we want them to do, you know, and we may not get a regulation this next round, but I think we've been waiting a darn long time when we talk about it. Last time I was on this group, and I'd love to see some action, but I'll leave it at that.
Does anyone who hasn't already talked about their research think that they would be ready next month to report on some of what they found? Carter? Yeah, cool. Thanks.
I think it's a very worthwhile exercise. I think, Margaret, you came up with the idea. I think it's a great way to learn something new and see what's working.
Yeah, great. Glad you think so. I really appreciate everybody contributing.
Well, do you think there's any chance that we really will have an ordinance at some point in time? Or are we just kind of, you know, informing each other for interest sakes, basically?
So I know we keep talking about an ordinance, but I still would like for everybody to focus on sort of a broader thing and you know, look at these other comp plans and look at other programs that they're doing, and let's figure out what you know, what are our goals, and what is the big variety of programs that might be possible to achieve those goals. If an ordinance is one of them, fine, but I think if we're just thinking ordinance, we're not going to get anywhere.
We haven't come across a county yet that doesn't have a historic preservation ordinance, so that would be an interesting.
Well, yeah, but that's because we chose the ones that have ordinances. We chose the CLG communities. So it's a good point. So what do the other comp plans look like, the ones that aren't CLGs?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And of course we can, you know, I think it's worth considering to keep what is currently in the comp plan, I think, which is consider establishment of a local historic preservation ordinance.
Yeah.
If we lose that might not be great. But you know, just to echo you, Margaret, I don't think it can be our end all be all without promoting other strategies.
Yeah. Can't be the one way.
It's almost like we have to take baby steps, maybe.
Yeah, kind of see the long vision.
I think in terms of which counties you're researching, so far I've heard the ones you've said so far for high growth, but yeah, I mean it's only relevant to those that are experiencing a lot of growth pressure like we are. Because, you know, if it's a sleepy county, you know, way in Southwest Virginia or up in Highland County, I mean, Bath County, there's not that much development happening. So it's not as pressing a need. We need to look at those.
Yeah, we have
maybe you guys already know that. I'm late to the party.
Yeah, no, we have to go to threatened areas.
Well, what happens? I mean, Where's the opposition coming from? I mean, we know that when, was it 20 years or so ago, there was an attempt to get an ordinance through the Board of Supervisors. It failed miserably, but that was then, this is now. Where's the opposition coming from?
So it's important to make sure that everyone has their facts straight. The ordinance was never considered by the board. It did not, the work started as a plan and an ordinance, but it only moved forward as a plan. The ordinance work stopped so that the plan could move forward. Ordinance was never considered by the Planning Commission or the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, but it was because of some opposition, as I understand it.
I think that a current historic preservation plan outlines the history of the attempts of.
Okay, well, read it again.
I just, can you see the table, the Word document? Yeah, so that's just lists the counties that are being researched, just as a reminder. So.
I think, just want to go back to Betsy's question because it's a good one. I think that some of our struggle lies in allocation of resources, allocation of staff time, that being limited, and that in the mind of the current planning department as receives direction by Board of Supervisors, is historic preservation is not the #1 focus. So how would we promote a historic preservation ordinance? Who would write it? Who would, would we hire a consultant to help us to craft a historic preservation ordinance? What would that cost, right? So it's like, there's a lot of building blocks, I think, that need to be established, not only within community input, but even within the organization itself. I don't know exactly how to do that.
DHR has got some sort of, I guess, comprehensive ordinance models that they can suggest as a starting point.
That might be a good thing to research along with our county, study. But that's assuming the county is ready to implement that ordinance.
This is where, if you knew where the opposition is coming from, then you could talk to them. But
I don't think it's opposition. I think it's
opposition out there of people who, are loosely organized, then that's a different matter. My understanding was there was some opposition previously from the Board of Realtors.
I don't know that. I don't know. I mean, anytime what we're talking about is a restriction on property rights, right?
Right. And, it's a restriction that some people are willing to take because it promotes everybody's well-being and it helps to preserve the aesthetic, which preserves property values in the long run.
So if we got to a point where an ordinance was being considered, there would be a public, we would be involving the public, getting public input on it, and that's a point at which you would address whatever the current, opposition would be. So, but to even get to that point, there's a whole list of zoning text amendments. I mean, that one would need to be, rise to the top to have that work done. So Liz, you're right. There's a lot of internal stuff that would need to happen to bring that.
And I think there's work that the committee or the county or preservation advocates should do before talking. Okay, if the end goal is a preservation ordinance, what are you doing to lay the groundwork for that? How are you soliciting? How are you educating the public about the value of historic preservation and the virtue? And something like a local marker program could be a thing that gets our community interested in historic preservation. How is it, and sees that that's coming from the county, and the county is supporting it, and right, and building that trust and building that, getting that buy-in, and to just start with, well, we need a historic preservation ordinance. I think we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot, let alone it wouldn't be even realistic that anyone from the staff could put time towards doing it. So we all, I think, around here agree it would be a good thing to work for, but there are steps to get us there.
And I think something you said was, yeah, I think it was right on target. I mean, I think you need to be really specific about why it's needed. I mean, I think you need some numbers. You need some, you know, got to do that research, give those examples. Without that, I don't think it would be taken seriously.
Yeah, I agree with you, Margaret. I think some research on what's been lost and what's been preserved and why would be interesting to people in preparation for this, particularly what's been lost.
Well, I think what's been
go back through and see some of the pictures of this frame period structures that have been lost. They're beautiful.
Right, but I think we need to do better about explaining, not just listing what's been lost, but why is it matter that, you know, what you know, what's the significance of it? What really, not just that the building was lost, but what is
the significance in the context of what has been lost? I agree.
Sure, and how does it relate to other things in our county that we value, like or lean upon, like tourism, you know, quality of life and rural preservation, and making those links deeper, so that people go, oh yeah, we really do need this. I see why.
Maybe instead of an ordinance, it could be a designation. You know, the National Register properties are voluntarily, you submit, and they can always take it away, but there's tax incentives and so forth. So maybe if you got your historic designation, Albemarle County, some kind of historic designation, you know, just again, I keep going back to land use, like land use designation, where you do certain things, you're eligible for certain breaks and certain benefits. I don't think getting everybody to agree in an area on an ordinance is much more difficult. But if we started with the designation and see how that grew, that would educate more people of the benefits that are available for historic preservation. So, you know, starting with a designation would kind of get the momentum started. And the more designations we get, the more people talk, we can grow it into an ordinance.
Yeah, I think, Ross, what you're talking about would be like an incentive, you know, some sort of tax break on a historic structure were they to do something. And that something might be to keep it in a certain, you know, historic accuracy or authenticity or something like that.
So the Virginia Beach is one of the localities that I was researching, and it's not a county, but it has exactly that program. I don't know if we're enabled to do that, but that has the Virginia Beach Historical Register. It recognizes buildings of cultural significance. Honorific, carries no regulatory restrictions, but it does allow property owners to seek a local tax exemption for rehabilitation.
Right. For rehabilitation, interesting. Well, of course, if you rehabilitate a historic structure according to the Secretary of the Interior standards, you qualify for state and federal tax credits as well, I believe. So if they roll a local credit on top of that, that might be an interesting addition.
Right.
There are ways to do this, I'm sure. It's just that we've got to knock on the right doors.
Mhm.
Well, and I think too, just having the right approach. I mean, when I bought my house, which is, like I said, Roman numeral beams held together by pegs, you know, it's a very, very old house. And I got a letter from Preservation Piedmont that frankly wasn't a very nice letter. It just said, you are the owner of historic property. You better take care of it. No, this was from Preservation Piedmont. It was a I should have saved it. The tone of the letter was like, basically, you know, don't ruin your house. You know, and it was a terrible letter, and it was not inspiring. It was not helpful. It did not provide information for me as the owner of historic property on what I could do in the right way. It was just really negative, and we're watching you. And we took photos of your house on this date, so we know. I'm not kidding. And it was terrible.
What year was that?
This was I bought my house 11 years ago.
That was a different leadership under.
But I'm just saying that, you know, like, that's just not to be whiny, but that's an example of the opposite of what we want to do with people who are the lucky or proud or whatever owners of historic structures in our county, and to be helpful to them and tell them, you know, what a positive it is. And, you know, like, to all your points about tax credits and different things, like, you know, letting people know how they can take advantage of these things. And isn't this wonderful? And, you know, maybe this group could even provide some help, you know, because a lot of people own a lot of historic structures that are not well-resourced individuals, shall we say.
Well, and Karen, we do that. We send letters to new property owners, and unfortunately, there just aren't a whole lot of resources that aren't like, if you're not doing a big renovation and putting a lot of capital, your tax credit isn't really that helpful for average person buying a house.
Yeah, I know you have to do a certain percentage of it. Yeah, my dad did that. He's in Stanton, and he did a whole historic renovation.
But if we could couple it with a local incentive, right? Like the city has a freeze on assessment that I took advantage of when I renovated my house. That locked it in at the pre-assessment rate. I think then we could really excite some people, because we wouldn't just be saying, well, there's this federal tax credit, like really over there. We'd say this is something that we, the county, are doing.
Yeah, and I agree with your earlier points that you want to look at it from problem solution, right? So documenting what is the problem and why does it need to be addressed, and then what are all the myriad ways that one could get at this, from everything from education to incentives to all the way up to an actual ordinance, and that there's and maybe ideally the county would be able to take advantage of all of those, but I feel like we have nowhere to go but up, because I anyway, but I'm a doer. So, if there are ways, and I'd love to help with this. And so there are ways that I can move things along. I will definitely work on the strength of the language of the comp plan, but I think also we need to do what you all were just talking about, which is document as much as possible, make the case in the comp plan, so that it's not like, oh, historic preservation, it's nice, if you can afford it, but it's not really a pressing problem of the county.
Please move to the Scottsville district and run for supervisor.
I'm actually sitting in the Scottsville district now, because I opened my business in a little storefront that was empty. So now at least there's some zaniness going on in one storefront, but I'm not, I'm doing my part for Scottsville, but I live in Howardsville. I'll leave it at that. I just hang out down here in the South. That's why I am, but I'm excited to see you all in person when we get back together. And I'm constantly listening for whether there's something I can turn into a homework assignment or something for my students in the architecture school. So, let's all research, fill in the blank. Maybe we could do some extra pro bono work for you guys somehow. If not my class, there's those other planning classes that, if we approach the right professor, it could turn into something where you could get a bunch of grad students to do some research for you.
I think,
you know, because there's a lot of work.
Where we've struggled is in my opinion, community engagement. What does that look like? How do we do it? What are we asking for? How do we get out there into the community and let people know who we are and, you know, all the things we want them to know about historic preservation?
It just seems like such a popular topic. Sort of my wheels are spinning. Like, could we turn something into a grant proposal, like for a big campaign? But I think we could. I just think we need to be really clear on what it is we would want to do. And that goes back to that earlier comment about the fact that our strategic plan is so old for this committee. And, you know, I think that's a very first step, is to get that rolling. The county staff is the county is short staffed. The planning director just resigned last week. She was only here for a few months, so we got to start again with that. But I don't know. We'll think on it some more, because I do think we need some outside help. I think, Liz, you mentioned a consultant or something. So we have to find some resources to support some of this work so we can move this faster. You guys are doing a great job on your research, I'm sure, but it's hard. I mean, you all have other things that are pulling at you too.
And also, affordable housing is such a big issue in the county, where, you know, it kind of takes precedent over us sometimes.
Sort of at this point in time. And of course, as you know, Ross and Carter, housing just gets more and more expensive.
Yeah.
And that makes affordable housing harder and harder and harder.
Just need to jump in. We've got 4 minutes left. I hate to stop the conversation, but we do have 4 minutes.
Okay. Well, shall we, are there, so let's just go to the other business, Margaret? And anybody know of new owners of historic properties? Or threatened properties to watch, or recent demolished structures as of lately? I'm, Margaret, in the process of doing a demolition permit myself on an old cabin that we have, and it's been interesting for me to go through the process. So it's been very helpful. So you'll hear from me.
Okay, good.
Any open for any comments? Anybody have anything else they want to share? What's going on in our county?
Well, like I said, if anyone wants to throw me a few counties to research, I love digging into that stuff. It's my favorite stuff.
Karen, I will email you.
Okay. Yeah.
And Karen, you're a breath of fresh air. I'm so glad you were involved and passionate, and you know, it's really nice to have you on board. I'm very grateful that you're with us. Thank you. I'm excited to help you all out. And, excellent. I'll try to also keep this in mind as we're doing the comp plan. I really want, it's helpful to me because we're going to help with the comp plan, and to hear firsthand what you guys are wanting, as opposed to filtered through several layers. So. And we want to be a resource, you know, you know, whatever level it's at. I mean, I just, you know, again, sometimes I feel like we're just undertakers, you know, demo permits just and things. Documenting loss. I know, that's just depressing. It can wear you down walking through the rubble and, yeah. And, I'll think on some criteria and run it by our higher ups in planning to think about what we could come up with that would flag something to be alerted sooner and bring you guys in. You know, not for everything, but maybe I could draft something for you to look at, or just straw man. Well, what's interesting, you know, I'm looking at Loudoun and Fairfax, which, you know, a lot of people use Loudoun as the example of what not to do. And, you know, we're in a situation that Loudon was in is we're so busy growing, we're forgetting about what we have. And we're looking ahead on growth, but we're not appreciating what we already have. So, you know, it just seems like we have to have more of a vision of present and past than just future.
Absolutely. And, you know, the county's also had some various design meetings, which I'm not going to name which ones, but where they said, here's some designs for the future. And I've said, this just looks like Anywhere USA.
Yeah.
Like, we have unique character here, and we don't want to grow in that way that you wake up one day and you're not sure if you're in downtown Atlanta or Albemarle County.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, exciting stuff. Margaret's going to send me some homework, and I'll work on some criteria for next time.
Okay, well, everybody, the next meeting is virtual, and it's scheduled for July 25th, 4:30. And hope everybody will chime in and make sure we have, know that we have a quorum early. I know a lot of people have other activities during the summer and are spread out quite a bit more and not as structured, but hopefully we'll find a way to, you know, since we're virtual, it should be a little bit easier to catch up with us all. But everybody's time, effort, and interest is always greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
See you all next.
Bye-bye.
See you.